Kelly, have you ever played any Nintendo games on Atari?
Yes, yes, I have.
Nice.
Bog Panda.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bog Panda. I almost said Squat Cobbler. Even after all this time, it's still not completely out of the system yet.
It'll linger.
I am Dr. Mike at Official Pagan on everything. Joining me, as always.
Hi, everybody. This is Kelly at KELLYTHUL on Twitter and Instagram. And we would greatly appreciate it if you take a look at our YouTube channel, look through a few of the videos, maybe give them a like, drop some comments. If you like what you see, subscribe, turn on notifications. Maybe cruise on over to Facebook. There's a Bog Panda Facebook page. Give that a like. Another way to find out a very infrequently updated Facebook page, but we promise to be better and we'll get these things done. But there's a Facebook page as well. And then also some fine merchandise available on our website. Also needing a few updates, but also you can link to our merch store and get the t-shirts, which do get updated when we can get them through the highly critical eye of Teespring.
Well, today I'm going to start off by telling a little story. So, as most people watching this probably don't know, because I'm such a reserved person, I am a musician. And I would never self-promote on this show. But you guys should totally go listen to the Rustbound album. We recently passed 10 million streams, but I digress. My primary band, Pagan, a few years ago was on a tour called the Drones and Vajuels Tour. On that tour, we took a young man named Corey out with us. And Corey was excited at the time because of a recently released game in the Legend of Zelda franchise. And the reason he was excited is all the characters were fully voiced in it, and he had believed, mistakenly, that that was the first time that that was done in a Legend of Zelda game. That is not true. And I had to disavow him of that. And there's a lot of people online who believe that because they were forgetting about the Philips CDI Nintendo line. Now, Philips CDI is a not at all well-known CD-ROM based system that came out in the 90s. Do you remember that, sir?
By name and reputation.
Yeah, the reputation is not good. It had one game that was kind of like a breakout game. It might have even been a launch title. I believe it was called Burn Cycle. And that game got like really good reviews and I think got people pumped up for a system that just never really happened or took off. It was kind of sold in the way that I guess Commodore kind of pitched their products as like, it's a computer, but it was mainly just a gaming console, but could do some computery stuff. So Nintendo, believing that CD-ROM was, kind of a fad, had given up on their CD-ROM attachment, the Nintendo PlayStation, and didn't believe in it so much, they let their partner on that project, Sony, take it with them. There's no way that would come back and bite them. No. But they did want to make sure they had their bases covered. So they decided they were going to license out their top tier games like Mario and Zelda to Philips CDI because they were the ones who really had this whole CD-ROM market figured out. And they made a line of Nintendo games. They are infamously bad, but they have fully animated cutscenes, voiceovers, all that good stuff. So years before Nintendo actually embraced CDs on their own consoles or fully voiced, fleshed out characters, they had them. That's not the first time Nintendo's top tier titles have appeared on other systems, though. And probably most notably, they appeared on Atari. And Gaming Historian, which is a channel we've talked about before, I absolutely love and highly recommend their feature-length documentary on the history of Tetris. Even if you're not a Tetris fan, it's a really, really good documentary and seemingly relevant into Cold War II, The Revenge. So I would check it out, seriously. So highly recommend that. But they put out a little video about Atari putting out Nintendo games on their platform. This is really important because, as you would also see in the Tetris episode, Atari and Nintendo have a long and very contentious relationship. And it kind of goes back to this. Atari had licensed some Nintendo properties, and then they got into fights with ColecoVision and different things like that over the licensing rights. Later down the line, Atari started a bootleg or unauthorized Nintendo company called Tengen, so that they could release titles without paying on the NES without paying the Nintendo licensing fees, which were infamously high. And that included a port of Tetris, except Russia also licensed Tetris directly to Nintendo. So you had competing Tetris games on Nintendo, which led to such a huge court battle between the two companies that Sega actually pretended that they never made a Tetris game because there was a port of Tetris to Genesis, which Sega pulled and literally denied for decades ever existed, just because they wanted nothing to do with the ridiculousness of that lawsuit that hurt both companies probably in the end. So it's really interesting to kind of go back and see this. And I do vaguely remember, I definitely played Donkey Kong on 2600, and I vaguely remember Mario Brothers on there. Now, you said you had some experience with these games, sir?
Yeah, so it's a lot of the ColecoVision, or Coleco rather. So the Donkey Kong version of Nintendo's Donkey Kong for the Atari 2600 was produced by Coleco, and so that was definitely one. I never got Donkey Kong Jr., and so a couple of the other titles were there. Mario Brothers also I didn't. That was apparently a little bit tougher to get for the 2600. They were limited things. I think it's important to note, because like the little pieces, one of the pieces of history we want to kind of talk about here is, this process of Nintendo wins some, loses some. So they're like, they lose one on the whole, this PlayStation CD thing, that's going nowhere. We can shed that, have at it, Sony. So that was maybe not the best move, but here we're back, very early Nintendo. The Famicom is the device. It's in Japan and Japan only. They're looking to distribute it in the United States. And at that point, we're talking to Atari, and they were incredibly close to a deal. The framework for that also deals with, and Yasmin Bleeth, who I'd like to refer to as a misunderstood genius, she happened to be on a talk show at one point in between Baywatch filming, and mentioned that she liked to play Mario on her Atari, and that was kind of held out as an example of she doesn't know what she's talking about. But as I said, misunderstood genius. She knew exactly what she was talking about. Some of these titles were available, but yeah, Donkey Kong was my primary experience. I think we've covered in the past the last game I played on my Atari 2600 until the great revival that occurred here recently was when I got Pac-Man for the 2600. The train wreck version of Pac-Man that they first came out with, it was $50 100 years ago, and just a horrible port. But the Donkey Kong
$50 in today's money from back then, that was like $150 game, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and boy, talk about not getting the value for your dollar. There was nothing good about it. We're talking. That's the adult version Atari game pricing right there. That's what those are running. The Donkey Kong one did not have that problem at all. It worked out just fine. But the downside is, particularly the Coleco Donkey Kong version, one level. You get the main level, and that's basically all you can play. So they addressed the limitations different ways. On this one, they addressed it by saying, well, there was only really one level in Donkey Kong that mattered, and here it is. Enjoy.
Yeah, it's interesting. And speaking of Donkey Kong in particular, that was ported to a lot of different things, including like handheld games and things. But my personal favorite port of Donkey Kong was the Donkey Kong board game. I don't know if you ever played that, but if you looked at the Atari 2600 game and you were like, how can we downgrade this? There's a board game of Donkey Kong. Actually, though, it's funny. I remember it being kind of fun, the board game. I can't really remember the mechanics of how it worked out, but I do remember it was the similar setup. You were Mario. You started at the bottom of the board. It had the ladders and girders. Donkey Kong, of course, is at the top. You have to make your way up there. And they did incorporate barrels, like barrel pieces on there. I don't remember how but they were a part of the game.
Yeah, and it wasn't like a Connect 4 setup. It was an actual flat board.
No, it was an actual flat board. That would have been kind of cool if it was, something that was more three-dimensional. I was actually thinking, it's funny you say that, they had re-released a game called Fireball Island that I had played as a kid, and I was considering purchasing it. It's on the pricier side, especially when you start to get into the expansion packs, which I believe is all stuff that was originally included just with the board game when I bought it as a kid or got it as a kid. But it was a three-dimensional board. You laid it flat on the table, not like it didn't stand up like a Connect 4 kind of thing. The board laid flat on the table, but it was like a paper mache island essentially on the center of the board. And there's a volcano at the center of the board and marbles that represented lava. And depending on your different moves along the board, you had to make it to the top of the volcano without these marbles rolling down and hitting you and you dying essentially from the lava.
No, not familiar with that one at all. That sounds kind of cool though.
It was actually a really cool game. And like I said, it has been reissued. So you can purchase that on Amazon. I think it's like 40 or $50, which is kind of standard for board games nowadays. It definitely wasn't that much when I was a kid because I wouldn't have had it. I can't remember if I bought it or it was bought for me, but either way, I wouldn't have had it with a $50 price tag on there.
Excellent. Yeah. And I'll never buy a Pac-Man for $50 again.
It's funny that you say that. I was watching some stuff recently. So again, huge 32X supporter for anybody who doesn't know. You're wrong if you don't like 32X. One game for 32X that I've seen maligned recently, which was weird because it is the one game that at the time seemed to unite everybody on the 32X is good side, was their port of Mortal Kombat 2. Now, more recently, I've seen some complaints about it, and people kept mentioning the price. Now, 32X wasn't a pricey thing. That was the whole point, was that you were upgrading your Genesis to a 32-bit using this add-on so that you didn't have to go out and buy a whole new system. But apparently, Mortal Kombat 2 for 32X, which launched shortly after it did for the 16-bit systems, was $70 at the time it came out, which I did not remember, which is the equivalent of well over $100 for a game today. Whereas, the Super Nintendo and Genesis ports were like $40 or $50 or something like that. So it was priced significantly higher than other games at that time. And 32X games price wise were in line with regular Genesis games. So that was something I did not remember.
Yeah. See, it's great. I mean, it's interesting to see the kind of intersections of all these different, vendors of the different gaming systems or home consoles and how they were trying to position some. Well, this is really a home computer that you just happen to play games. Amiga kind of got that knock a little bit, that you're saying, oh, that's really more of really a gaming system, which it was outstanding as a gaming system, but it also was the first one that offered multitasking. It had not such a great word processor, but they did have a word processor. And it certainly worked well as a computer. And if you're doing any sort of animation, it would tend towards more the art side of the equation, that you could do stuff, but it was, positioned to do that. But, it didn't exactly do great. And then here, Atari on the cusp, probably kicking themselves now that if they had hung in there, they almost had the deal inked. And then there was, as Mike talked about, several different spats that occurred about licensing and who's had this. And hey, I thought I had this exclusively on, and I believe it was Donkey Kong. I had to believe I have this exclusively for my system, and now it's showing up on a home computer. And some questions of, is it exclusive for the media, a cartridge, or whatever? But that kind of blew an additional hole in the relationship. And so eventually, and this has all happened around 1983, all right, when the video industry is kind of crashing anyway. So Nintendo kind of pulled back, waited a couple of years, and in 1985, out comes the NES. And Atari could have headed off a major competitor and kind of rode the wave there if they were the distribution network for the NES. But they were pretty convinced that their future editions, and I can never even keep the numbers straight on, I think it was 5200 and 7800, I think maybe.
Yeah. 5200 I really haven't played much for. 7800 is something that's more recent for me, between the Fight Stick and Evercade collections. But there's some great games on there, like Ninja Golf. Honestly become one of my favorite games, period. And Basket Brawl, that's another really good one that's on there. Sort of a proto NBA Jam in the sense that it has more of an arcade feel than a like actual basketball simulation type game. So a lot of good stuff on there. But can you imagine how things would have played out had Atari released the NES in America?
Yeah, they'd be in a lot better shape.
Well, so that's an interesting thing though, because there's a part of me that's like, yeah, obviously Atari would still be a superpower the way that Nintendo is, but the other hand of that is maybe they wouldn't have been. Maybe they would have mishandled it because Atari, made some interesting calls around that time, like producing more copies of ET than Atari systems existed. Things like that. So like there was a lot of interesting stuff and decisions that were going on at Atari. So they may have also completely dropped the ball and we wouldn't even have a Nintendo.
That's true, which would have been unfortunate.
So it's interesting to think about though. And it's also cool because I think what is really interesting to me about it as a big fan of that Tetris documentary, and I remember the Tengen games and stuff like that. It's really interesting to see how this is kind of the beginning of the erosion of the relationship between those two companies that eventually led to that long protracted court battle.
Yeah. But we all know we're just, much like the rapture, we don't know when it's going to happen, but pretty soon television is going to come down from the sky with a fully completed Amico and decimate the home console market. So
you're going to wonder why anybody ever talked about another console before the Amico.
It'll be all over then. But, and it's all over for us for this week. So I hope you enjoyed it. As mentioned before, we greatly appreciate hearing from you in the comments. If there's content you'd like to see us cover, subscriptions, likes certainly help the channel out in the Google algorithm. So please consider helping us out there. If you could, it'd be fantastic. And anything to add before we close, sir?
No, I think that's it. Again, I know it was a shock to everybody, but you should listen to my album, The Rust Belt. I'll probably never bring it up again. So now's a good time to go listen to that.
Not on this show. Thanks for watching, folks.
Thanks, everybody.